The town of Millbrook Falls was the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Population 8,342. One main street. Two churches. A single traffic light that blinked yellow after 9 p.m. The most excitement residents could expect was the annual Pumpkin Festival, or maybe a heated debate at the town council meeting about whether to repave Maple Avenue. That all changed on October 14th, 2019. Sarah Chen had lived in Millbrook Falls for 3 years, ever since she'd taken the job as head librarian at the Millbrook Public Library. At 32, she was organized to a fault. She color-coded her calendar. She meal prepped every Sunday. She never missed her Tuesday evening book club or her Thursday morning yoga class. Her co-workers could set their watches by her arrival at 8:47 every morning, coffee in hand, ready to unlock the library doors at precisely 9 a.m. So when Sarah didn't show up for work on Monday, October 14th, alarm bells immediately went off. By Tuesday afternoon, her car, a silver Honda Civic, was found abandoned in the parking lot of Riverside Park, approximately 4 miles outside of town. The driver's side door was unlocked. Her purse sat in the passenger seat, wallet and phone still inside. The key was in the ignition. Everything pointed to someone who had stepped out of their car for just a moment, expecting to return immediately. She never did. The initial police investigation, led by Detective Mark Rivera, followed standard missing persons protocol. They interviewed Sarah's friends, her colleagues at the library, her ex-boyfriend from 2 years ago who now lived in Boston. They checked her bank accounts, no unusual activity. They pulled her phone records, nothing suspicious. Her last text message, sent at 6:47 p.m. on Sunday evening, was to her mother. Made your chicken recipe. Turned out great. Talk tomorrow. Love you. Sarah's apartment showed no signs of struggle. Her bed was neatly made. Dishes were done. A load of laundry sat folded in a basket on her couch. The only thing out of place, investigators noted, was her laptop sitting open on her kitchen table, still powered on, displaying a document that had been left open. It was a Word file titled Millbrook History Project, Draft 3. Sarah had been researching local history for the past 6 months, a personal project she'd mentioned to friends, but hadn't shared many details about. The document on her laptop was 127 pages long, filled with meticulous notes about Millbrook Falls dating back to its founding in 1889. There were scanned newspaper clippings, photographs of old buildings, genealogies of founding families. Detective Rivera skimmed through it. Local history seemed harmless enough. He made a note to have someone read through it more carefully later, but his instincts told him this was likely a random abduction, wrong place at wrong time. Maybe she'd gone for a walk in the park, been grabbed by someone passing through town. It happened, even in quiet places like Millbrook Falls. The case went cold within weeks. Despite extensive searches of Riverside Park and the surrounding woods, despite interviews with over 200 local residents, despite Sarah's face plastered on missing persons websites and news broadcasts across 3 states, there were no leads, no witnesses, no body. Sarah Chen had simply vanished. Her mother, Ellen Chen, refused to give up. She moved to Millbrook Falls, staying in Sarah's apartment. She organized search parties every weekend, She badgered Detective Rivera weekly, then daily, for updates. She hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who specialized in cold cases. It was Marcus Webb who first suggested that maybe, just maybe, Sarah's disappearance had something to do with her research. But what neither Ellen nor Marcus knew was that Sarah had been more careful than anyone realized. She'd sensed danger in the weeks before her disappearance. She'd taken precautions, hidden evidence, left clues for anyone smart enough to find them. The question was, would they find those clues in time? Marcus Webb had worked cold cases for 15 years. He knew that the answer was usually simple: a jealous ex, a robbery gone wrong, a tragic accident. But something about Sarah Chen's disappearance didn't fit the usual patterns. The scene was too clean, too staged. The abandoned car with the purse still inside felt theatrical, like someone wanted police to find it exactly that way. Webb spent his first week on the case doing what Detective Rivera's team had already done: re-interviewing witnesses, checking alibis, following the standard playbook. By week 2, he'd come to the same conclusion: there was nothing in Sarah's personal life that explained her disappearance, which left the research. Webb printed out all 127 pages of Millbrook History Project, Draft 3, and spent 3 days reading every word, cross-referencing every footnote, examining every scanned document Sarah had included. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect from local history: founding families, old businesses, changes to the town layout over the decades. But there was one section buried on page 87 that made Webb sit up straighter. Sarah had discovered something strange about Millbrook Falls' past. Every 25 years, going back to 1919, someone in the town disappeared without a trace. Not just went missing, disappeared under mysterious circumstances with no resolution. 1919. Margaret Whitmore, a schoolteacher, last seen walking home from church. Her coat and hat were found neatly folded on a bench at Riverside Park. 1944. James Hartley, owner of Hartley's General Store, vanished during his evening walk. His pocket watch was discovered near the river, still ticking. 1969. Rebecca Lawson, a nurse at Millbrook Medical Clinic, failed to show up for her shift. Her car was found unlocked at Riverside Park, her medical bag on the front seat. 1994. Thomas Grant, a high school history teacher, disappeared after school one Thursday. His briefcase was found at Riverside Park, papers scattered as if he'd dropped it in haste. Webb felt his pulse quicken as he read Sarah's notes. She'd identified the pattern. Every 25 years, every disappearance connected to Riverside Park, every victim someone respectable, well known in the community, and every case remained unsolved. Sarah's notes included a handwritten addition in the margin: 1994 plus 25 equals 2019. This year? She'd seen it coming. She'd known she might be next. But there was something else in Sarah's notes that Webb almost missed. A small annotation on page 89, written in different colored ink, added later, perhaps. It read, "But what about 1894? Check newspaper archives. Something happened before the pattern started." Webb made a note to investigate this further. If Sarah had discovered something about 1894, it might be the key to understanding everything. He brought his findings to Detective Rivera, expecting resistance. Instead, Rivera pulled out his own file folder, one he'd been quietly compiling on his own time. "I noticed it too," Rivera admitted. "After I read through her research, I didn't mention it because it sounds insane. You can't have a pattern spanning 100 years. It would require multiple perpetrators, some kind of organization, or someone passing down a tradition," Webb interrupted. "A family secret, something generational." Rivera nodded slowly. "I started looking into the founding families of Millbrook Falls. Specifically, who might have descendants still living here today." He spread out a genealogy chart on his desk. At the center was a name: Harold Blackwood, one of the town's founders in 1889. The Blackwood family had been prominent in Millbrook Falls for generations. They'd owned the lumber mill, served as mayor multiple times, sat on every important committee. "The current Blackwood is Robert," Rivera said. 67 years old, retired lawyer, respected member of the community. He runs the Historical Society. Webb's eyes narrowed. Sarah would have interacted with him for her research. "More than that," Rivera replied, pulling out a sign-in sheet from the Millbrook Historical Society. "She visited the Historical Society archives 17 times in the past 6 months. Robert Blackwood personally assisted her on at least 12 of those visits. His signature is right here next to hers in the guest log." But then Rivera pulled out another document. "Here's what's interesting. I got Sarah's library checkout records. 3 weeks before she disappeared, she checked out a book on Native American history of this region, specifically about the Seneca people who originally inhabited this valley." "Why would that matter?" Webb asked. "Because," Rivera said, pulling out a photocopy of an old newspaper article, "I found this in the state archives. It's from October 1889, just after Millbrook Falls was founded. There's a mention of a dispute between Harold Blackwood and the Seneca elders over the land purchase. The elders claimed Blackwood had violated the terms of the sale. The article doesn't specify what those terms were, but it mentions that 3 Seneca representatives came to Millbrook Falls to confront Blackwood about it. And," Webb prompted, "and they were never heard from again," Rivera said quietly. "There's no record of them leaving town, no mention of them in any subsequent documents. 3 people just vanished from the historical record." Webb felt a chill run down his spine. "Sarah found this too, didn't she?" Rivera nodded. "I think she did, and I think she realized that the pattern didn't start in 1919. That was just when it became obvious. I think whatever happened with those 3 Seneca representatives in 1889, that's where this all began. They had their first real lead, but they needed to be careful. Robert Blackwood wasn't just any citizen. He had connections. His brother-in-law was a district judge. His nephew worked in the state attorney general's office. If they made accusations without solid evidence, Blackwood would bury them in lawsuits and political pressure." Webb suggested a different approach. "We need to search the Blackwood property, but we need probable cause, something that would hold up under scrutiny." "We don't have probable cause," Rivera said. "All we have is a historical pattern and the fact that he knew the missing woman. Any judge would laugh us out of court." Webb smiled grimly. "Then we need to find more evidence, and I think I know where to look." But what Webb didn't tell Rivera was that he'd noticed something else in Sarah's research. something that suggested she wasn't the only person currently investigating the Blackwood family. Someone else had been asking questions too, and Webb needed to find out who before they became the next victim. The Millbrook Historical Society occupied an old Victorian mansion on the edge of downtown, donated to the town by the Blackwood family in 1952. Its basement archives contain documents, photographs, and artifacts dating back to Millbrook Falls' founding. Access was technically public, but in practice, you needed to make an appointment and be escorted by Robert Blackwood or one of his volunteers. Webb made an appointment under a false pretense, researching his own family tree, claiming his great-grandfather had lived in Millbrook Falls in the 1920s. Blackwood, ever the gracious historian, agreed to meet with him on a Thursday afternoon. Walking into the Historical Society, Webb immediately understood why Sarah had come here so often. The archives were incredible. Shelves upon shelves of leather-bound ledgers, filing cabinets full of photographs, glass cases displaying artifacts from Millbrook Falls past. Robert Blackwood gave every appearance of being a dedicated custodian of local history, eager to share the town's stories with anyone who showed interest. "Your great-grandfather's name was Webb, you said?" Blackwood asked, leading Marcus down to the basement archives. "I don't recall that name in our records, but let's take a look." Blackwood was tall and lean, with silver hair and steel-rimmed glasses. He moved through the archives with practiced efficiency, pulling out ledgers and census records. While Blackwood searched for the non-existent Webb family, Marcus used the opportunity to observe. The basement was larger than it appeared from the entrance, extending back into what must have been the original foundation of the house. Most of it was organized archives, but at the very back, Marcus noticed something odd. A newer wooden door with a modern deadbolt lock. Unlike every other door in the building, this one wasn't original to the Victorian structure. It had been installed recently, probably within the last decade. "What's back there?" Marcus asked casually, gesturing toward the locked door. Blackwood didn't even glance up from the ledger he was examining. "Storage for documents that need climate control, extremely fragile materials, some dating back to the 1880s. The lock is to maintain the environment. Can't have people going in and out, letting in humidity." "Makes sense," Marcus replied, though his investigator's instincts told him otherwise. Climate-controlled storage didn't need a deadbolt. It needed a proper sealed door, maybe a specialized HVAC system. A deadbolt was for keeping people out. As Blackwood continued searching through records, Marcus noticed something else. On a shelf near the locked door, there was a guest registry book, different from the main sign-in sheet upstairs. This one was older, with entries dating back years. Marcus casually moved closer, pretending to examine some photographs on display. He glimpsed a few entries in the registry. Most were standard. Dates, names, brief notes about research topics. But then he saw something that made his heart race. An entry from September 2019, just a month before Sarah's disappearance. The name was Michael Torres, and the note read, "Researching environmental impact of historical lumber operations, Blackwood Mill Records." Marcus had heard that name before. Michael Torres was a freelance journalist who'd been working on a story about industrial pollution in small towns across the Northeast. He'd contacted Detective Rivera's office months ago, asking about historical records related to the old lumber mill. But Torres had never published his story. In fact, Marcus couldn't find any recent work from him at all. The journalist's social media had gone silent in early October 2019, right around the time Sarah disappeared. Marcus continued his charade for another hour before thanking Blackwood and leaving. But his mind was racing. Two people investigating Millbrook Falls history. Both had visited the Historical Society. Both had disappeared in October 2019. The 25-year pattern might not be as strict as they'd thought. That evening, Marcus met with Detective Rivera at a diner outside of town, somewhere they could talk without being overheard. "There's a locked room in the basement," Marcus explained. "Blackwood says it's climate-controlled storage, but the door is all wrong for that. I need to know what's in there." "We still don't have probable cause for a warrant," Rivera said. "A suspicious door isn't enough." "There's more," Marcus continued. He told Rivera about the guest registry and Michael Torres. "I think Sarah wasn't the only one taken in 2019. I think Torres disappeared too. But nobody connected it because he wasn't local. He was a transient journalist who could have been anywhere." Rivera pulled out his phone and started searching. After a few minutes, his face went pale. Michael Torres was reported missing by his sister in Miami on October 20th, 2019, 6 days after Sarah disappeared. Last known location was somewhere in upstate New York, but the family wasn't sure exactly where. The case is still open, but there are no leads. 2 victims in one cycle, Marcus said. That breaks the pattern, unless the pattern was never about timing, Rivera finished. It was about silencing anyone who got too close to the truth. 25 years was just how long it typically took for someone to dig deep enough to be dangerous. Webb leaned forward. Which means there could be other victims we don't know about. People who came to Millbrook Falls asking questions and simply vanished without anyone connecting them to the town. Rivera was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he said, "What if we could connect Blackwood to Torres? If we can prove Torres was here and Blackwood knew him, that gives us a second missing person connected to the Historical Society. That might be enough for a warrant." "We need to find Torres's rental car," Webb said. "If he drove here, he had to rent a vehicle or drive his own car. If we can trace his movements, prove he was in Millbrook Falls." Rivera nodded. "I'll put out inquiries to rental companies and check traffic cameras on the main roads into town. If Torres was here, we'll find proof." But as they were preparing to leave the diner, Rivera's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. All it said was, "Sarah knew about the third door. Check the library basement. Come alone." Marcus and Rivera exchanged glances. "It's a trap," Marcus said. "Maybe," Rivera replied. "Or maybe Sarah had an ally we don't know about. Someone who's been waiting to see if anyone would follow her trail." "Either way," Marcus said, "we're going to that library." The Millbrook Public Library closed at 8 p.m. on weekdays. Rivera and Webb waited until 8:30, watching from across the street to make sure the building was empty. Then Rivera used his authority as a detective to access the building, claiming they were following up on a lead in Sarah's disappearance. The library was quiet and dark, lit only by emergency exit signs and the glow of street lights filtering through windows. They made their way to the basement, which housed old book storage and the library's original archives from when it was founded in 1923. "What are we looking for?" Rivera whispered. "A third door, apparently," Marcus replied, "whatever that means." They searched the basement systematically. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Shelves of old books, filing cabinets with decades-old library records, a few boxes of donated materials waiting to be sorted. But in the far corner, behind a shelf of particularly dusty volumes, Marcus noticed something odd. The wall didn't quite line up right. There was a gap, maybe an inch wide, where the wall met the floor, and when he pressed against the bookshelf, it moved slightly, not because it was unstable, but because it was on wheels. "Rivera," Marcus called softly, "help me with this." Together, they pushed the shelf aside. Behind it was indeed a door, old and wooden, with peeling paint, but with a relatively new padlock securing it. Rivera pulled out his flashlight and examined the lock. "This is recent. Within the last year, I'd say." "Sarah had keys to the entire library," Marcus said. "She could have accessed this any time." Rivera made a decision. "Stand back." He used a small pry bar from his investigation kit to break the lock. It snapped with a sharp crack that echoed in the quiet basement. Behind the door was a small room, no more than 8 by 8 feet. It looked like it had once been some kind of utility closet or maintenance space, but now it contained something else entirely, a makeshift investigation board. The walls were covered with papers, photographs, maps, timelines, all connected with colored string. It was Sarah's investigation, but far more extensive than what had been on her laptop. This was everything she'd discovered, everything she'd suspected, laid out in meticulous detail. But there was more. A laptop sat on a small desk in the corner, still plugged in and powered on. And sitting in front of that laptop, in a camping chair, was a person. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and tired eyes. She looked up as they entered, unsurprised. "You're late," she said. "I sent that text 3 hours ago." "Who are you?" Rivera demanded, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. "My name is Jessica Hartley," the woman said. "My great-grandfather was James Hartley, the man who disappeared in 1944. Sarah contacted me 6 months ago because she'd seen my blog about family mysteries. I'd been researching what happened to him for years. When Sarah disappeared, I knew she'd found something, so I came to Millbrook Falls to continue her work." Marcus lowered his guard slightly. "Why hide down here? Why not go to the police?" Jessica laughed bitterly. "Because the police chief in this town is married to Robert Blackwood's niece. Because the mayor is on the Historical Society's board of directors. Because this town is still controlled by the same families that founded it, and they protect their own." Sarah knew that. She only trusted Detective Rivera because he was new to town, transferred here just 2 years ago. Rivera frowned. "Why didn't you contact me directly?" "Because I needed to make sure you were actually investigating," Jessica replied, "that you hadn't been compromised. I've been watching you both for 2 weeks, making sure you were following the right leads. When you went to the Historical Society, I knew you were on the right track." She gestured to the investigation board. Sarah discovered more than just a pattern of disappearances. She found the reason behind them. It all goes back to 1889, to the original land purchase from the Seneca people. Jessica pulled up a document on her laptop. Harold Blackwood bought this land for his lumber operation. But according to Seneca oral histories that Sarah tracked down, the land was sacred. There was a cave system here that the Seneca used for ceremonies. Blackwood was told that the land could be purchased, but the caves had to remain undisturbed. It was a spiritual requirement. But Blackwood used the caves anyway, Marcus guessed. Jessica nodded. He turned them into storage for his lumber operation. When the Seneca representatives came to confront him about the violation, Blackwood killed them, all 3 of them. And he hid their bodies in the caves. That's why the pattern started, Rivera said slowly. The guilt. The fear of being discovered. It's more than that, Jessica continued. She pulled up another document, a scanned image of what looked like a very old letter. This is from Harold Blackwood's private correspondence, which Sarah found in the Historical Society archives. He wrote to his son in 1919, right around the time Margaret Whitmore disappeared. In the letter, he confesses to killing the Seneca representatives, but he also says that he did something else, something he thought would protect the family forever. Jessica read from the letter. I have placed the proof of our deed within the cave, along with the bones of those we wronged. Let it remain there as a reminder to future Blackwoods of the price of our prosperity. But should anyone else discover what lies beneath, they too must join the silent witnesses so that the truth remains buried with them. Marcus felt sick. He turned it into a family mandate. Kill anyone who discovers the truth. Every generation of Blackwoods has followed that mandate, Jessica said, not out of belief in some spiritual curse, but out of fear that the original murders would be discovered. They've been covering up a cover-up for over a century. Rivera was studying the investigation board. Sarah found proof of all this? She found enough to piece it together, Jessica said. She discovered that the caves extend under both the Historical Society and this area of town. There are multiple entrances, one on the Blackwood property, one that used to be accessible from the old library building that stood where the Historical Society is now, and one more that she believed was somewhere in Riverside Park. That's why the victims' cars were always found at Riverside Park, Marcus realized. They weren't abducted from the park. They were lured to the park entrance of the caves. Jessica nodded. Sarah figured that out. She wrote in her notes that she believed Robert Blackwood contacted her claiming to have found additional documents she'd want to see. He suggested meeting at Riverside Park because the documents were supposedly stored in an old park maintenance building. But it was a trap. Do you have Sarah's notes? Rivera asked. The ones from down here? Jessica pulled out a flash drive. Everything. All her research. All her evidence, including this. She opened a file on the laptop showing a scanned photograph. It was old, faded, but clear enough to make out. 3 Native American men standing beside Harold Blackwood. The photo was dated August 1889. Sarah found this in a box of uncatalogued photos at the Historical Society, Jessica explained. On the back, written in Blackwood's handwriting, it says, "The last guests of Millbrook Falls." Sarah believed it was taken just days before he killed them. Rivera took the flash drive. This is enough. This is enough for a warrant to search the Blackwood property and the cave system. There's one more thing, Jessica said. She opened another file. Sarah discovered that Michael Torres, the journalist, had made an appointment to meet with Robert Blackwood on October 15th, 2019, the day after Sarah disappeared. Torres never showed up for that appointment. His rental car was found abandoned at Riverside Park 2 days later, but it was towed by a local company before police connected it to a missing person case. The towing company is owned by Robert Blackwood's cousin. Torres is down there too, Marcus said quietly. In the caves. Jessica nodded, tears forming in her eyes. And so is Sarah. I've been trying to find a way to get them out, to get justice for all of them, but I couldn't do it alone. Rivera was already on his phone, calling for backup. We're getting a warrant tonight. Judge Morrison is still awake. I'll drive to her house if I have to. And then we're going into those caves, and we're ending this. But as he spoke, they heard something that made everyone freeze. Footsteps on the floor above them. Someone was in the library. Did you tell anyone you were coming here? Jessica whispered urgently. No, Rivera replied, drawing his weapon. Nobody knew. The footsteps moved toward the basement stairs. Slowly, deliberately. Someone who knew exactly where they were going. Marcus moved to position himself beside the door, ready to confront whoever was coming. Rivera pulled Jessica behind him, protecting her. The basement door opened. Footsteps on the stairs. And then a voice called down. Detective Rivera? Marcus Webb? I know you're down here. And I know what you've found. We need to talk. The voice was familiar. It belonged to Police Chief Harold Patterson, Robert Blackwood's nephew by marriage. Rivera and Marcus exchanged glances. They were trapped in a basement with evidence that could implicate some of the town's most powerful families. And the police chief, who might be compromised, was blocking their only exit. How do you know we're here? Rivera called up the stairs, his weapon aimed at the doorway. Because I've been waiting for someone to finally investigate this properly, Chief Patterson replied. And because I installed security cameras in this library 6 months ago, after I started suspecting that Sarah had discovered something important. I've been watching her investigation and yours, hoping someone would finally bring enough evidence to take down my uncle. There was a long pause. Then Patterson appeared at the bottom of the stairs, hands raised, showing he was unarmed. I'm here to help you, he said. And I'm here to tell you that if you want to get Robert Blackwood, you need to move fast, because I think he knows you're getting close, and I think he's preparing to run. The warrant came through at 11:47 p.m. that same night. Judge Morrison, after reviewing Jessica's evidence and hearing Chief Patterson's testimony about the suspicious circumstances surrounding multiple missing persons cases, agreed that there was probable cause to search the Blackwood property, the cave systems beneath it, and any connected underground passages. Patterson's involvement had been a game changer. He'd been quietly documenting his suspicions about his uncle for years, ever since he'd found some disturbing notes in his late father's belongings. Notes that suggested his father had known about the Blackwood family's dark secret but had been too afraid to speak up. My father died of a heart attack 10 years ago, Patterson had explained as they waited for the warrant. But before he died, he told me to never trust Robert Blackwood, no matter what. He said the Blackwood family had blood on their hands going back generations. I didn't understand what he meant until I started looking into the historical disappearances. By midnight, they had assembled a full tactical team, not from Millbrook Falls. Patterson had called in the state police, explaining that local officers might be compromised due to family connections. They met at the edge of town, staging their operation away from prying eyes. The plan was to hit the Blackwood property at dawn, But as they were preparing, one of the state troopers monitoring Robert Blackwood's house radioed in. "Subject is loading luggage into his vehicle. Looks like he's preparing to leave." "Go now," Rivera ordered. "We can't let him run." The convoy of police vehicles descended on the Blackwood property just after 1 a.m. Robert Blackwood was indeed loading his car, a black Mercedes with suitcases and boxes. When he saw the police vehicles coming up his driveway, he didn't run. He simply stopped, set down the box he was carrying, and waited. "Robert Blackwood!" Rivera called out, approaching with his weapon drawn. "You're under arrest for the murders of Sarah Chen and Michael Torres, and for conspiracy in multiple other homicides." Blackwood looked at Rivera with an expression that was hard to read. Was it relief? Resignation? He nodded slowly. "I wondered when this day would come. A part of me hoped it would be soon." "You're admitting to the murders?" Rivera asked, surprised. "I'm admitting that I've carried a burden my entire life," Blackwood replied. "A burden I inherited from my father, who inherited it from his father, going back to Harold Blackwood himself. But I'm tired, Detective. I'm 67 years old, and I'm tired of living with what my family has done." As state police officers handcuffed Blackwood, Marcus approached him. "Where are they? Where are Sarah and the others?" Blackwood looked at Marcus with sad eyes. "In the caves, where they've always been, where all the witnesses end up. I'll show you. But you need to understand, I didn't want this. None of us wanted this. But once the pattern started, once the first killing was covered up with a second and then a third, there was no way to stop without destroying everything the Blackwood family had built." "You could have gone to the authorities decades ago," Marcus said, anger rising in his voice. "And said what?" Blackwood replied. "That my great-grandfather killed 3 Seneca men in 1889? That my grandfather killed Margaret Whitmore to prevent her from finding the bodies? That my father killed James Hartley for the same reason? Each generation inherited the guilt of the previous one. Each generation killed to protect not themselves, but the memory of their fathers and grandfathers. It became a twisted form of loyalty." He paused, then added, "But I'm the last Blackwood. I have no children. When I die, the family name dies with me." "And perhaps that's justice." Rivera nodded to the officers. "Take him to the state police barracks, not the local jail. I want him in secure custody." As they led Blackwood away, Patterson approached Rivera and Marcus. "There's something you need to know before we go into the caves. I've been researching the layout, and I found something disturbing. According to old mining surveys, the cave system is extensive. It goes under most of the town center, and there are areas marked as unstable on surveys from the 1950s. "You're saying the caves could collapse?" Marcus asked. "I'm saying we need to be careful," Patterson replied. "Some of these passages haven't been entered in decades. We don't know what condition they're in." They assembled at the entrance to the caves on the Blackwood property at 2 a.m. Robert Blackwood, in handcuffs, was brought to guide them. He led them through his property to a spot behind the Historical Society building, the old mansion his family had donated to the town. "The entrance is here," Blackwood said, pointing to what looked like an old root-cellar door set into the hillside. "This is how my father accessed the caves. How I accessed them." State police officers with tactical gear and caving equipment opened the door. Stone steps led down into darkness. The air that rose from below was cold and damp, smelling of earth and something else. Something organic that had been left to decay for far too long. "I'll go first," Marcus said. "I owe it to Ellen Chen to find her daughter." Rivera nodded. "We go in teams. No one goes anywhere alone." They descended into the caves. The stone steps led down about 15 feet before opening into a man-made chamber. The same kind of construction as root cellars from the late 1800s. But this chamber extended back farther than any root cellar should, and lining the walls were shelves. Metal shelving units, obviously added much more recently. Filled with cardboard boxes, Marcus approached the nearest box. The label read 1915 to 1925. Inside were personal effects: a woman's brooch, reading glasses, a journal. He recognized the handwriting. Margaret Whitmore. "These are trophies," Dr. Amy Park said, the forensic specialist who'd joined the search. "Each box contains items taken from the victims." There were dozens of boxes spanning more than a century. Each one represented someone whose life had been taken to protect the Blackwood family's secret. But they hadn't found the bodies yet. Blackwood, standing with 2 officers, pointed to the back of the chamber. "There's a passage. It was sealed with bricks, but I removed them when I brought Sarah and Torres here. The bodies are beyond that point, in the natural cave system." The passage led deeper into the earth, away from the man-made chambers and into caves that had been formed by water over millennia. The walls became rough limestone, the passages narrow and winding. They had to walk single file, flashlights cutting through the darkness. After 50 feet, the passage opened into a larger cave, and there, arranged with ceremonial precision, were the bodies. Not 5, as they'd expected. 11. Margaret Whitmore, James Hartley, Rebecca Lawson, Thomas Grant. These were the ones they knew about. Sarah Chen and Michael Torres, the recent victims. But there were 5 others, older remains that had been mummified by the dry, cool conditions of the cave. "The 3 Seneca men from 1889, Dr. Park said, examining the oldest remains. "And 2 others. Blackwood spoke quietly from where he stood with the officers. 1894 and 1895. There were 2 others who discovered the truth before the 25-year pattern was established. My great-grandfather killed them before he decided that spacing the murders further apart would make them less suspicious." Marcus knelt beside Sarah Chen's body. She looked peaceful, as if sleeping. Her hands were folded across her chest. Beside her was a leather-bound journal, similar to the one Rivera had mentioned from Blackwood's confession, but this one was newer. Marcus picked it up carefully and opened it. The handwriting was Sarah's. The journal entry was dated October 13th, 2019, the day she disappeared. "If you're reading this, then I didn't make it out. I'm in the caves beneath Millbrook Falls, and I've found the bodies of people murdered by the Blackwood family across 130 years. I've documented everything. The evidence is in my secret room at the library basement. Jessica Hartley has a copy of all my research. Tell my mother I love her. Tell her I died trying to uncover the truth, and tell her that the truth was worth dying for, because now the Blackwoods can never hide what they've done. The last witness has become part of the evidence." Marcus felt tears sting his eyes. Sarah had known she was going to die. She'd gone into the caves anyway to find the proof, to become part of the evidence that would finally bring justice. "She was so brave," Marcus whispered. Rivera placed a hand on his shoulder. She was. And because of her, this ends today. But as they were preparing to document the scene and recover the bodies, one of the state troopers called out from a side passage, "Detective, you need to see this." They followed the trooper into another chamber and found something none of them had expected. Another body, but this one was recent, days old, not weeks. Dr. Park examined the body quickly. Male, approximately 60 years old, died from blunt force trauma to the head. Patterson's flashlight caught the face. He gasped. "That's Richard Blackwood, Robert's brother. He went missing 3 days ago. We thought he'd gone on a fishing trip." They all turned to look at Robert Blackwood, who stood calmly, despite being handcuffed. "Why?" Rivera demanded. "Why kill your own brother?" "Because he found out what I'd done to Sarah and Torres," Blackwood replied, his voice emotionless. "He'd been asking questions, going through family papers. He confronted me, said he was going to the police. I couldn't let him destroy our family's reputation. Even at the end, even knowing it was all going to come out eventually, I couldn't break the pattern." Marcus stared at him in horror. "You killed your own brother to protect a secret that was about to be exposed anyway?" "The pattern demanded it," Blackwood said. "Anyone who knows the truth must join the silent witnesses. That was Harold Blackwood's mandate. I couldn't be the one to break it. Even now, even with all of you knowing, I fulfilled my duty to the family legacy." Rivera shook his head in disgust. "You didn't fulfill any duty. You destroyed your family's legacy. The Blackwood name will be remembered for nothing but murder and cowardice." As they began the process of recovering the bodies and securing the cave as a crime scene, Marcus thought about Sarah Chen. She'd solved her own murder before it happened. She'd left a trail that ensured the truth would come out. She'd become the last witness, but her testimony would echo through the courts, through history, ensuring that the Blackwood family's century of murder would finally face justice. The caves beneath Millbrook Falls had held their dark secret for 130 years. But Sarah Chen, with her curiosity and courage and meticulous research, had finally brought that secret into the light. The trial of Robert Blackwood began 6 months later and lasted 3 weeks. It was held in the state capitol, far from Millbrook Falls, due to concerns about jury bias in a town where the Blackwood family still had influence. The prosecution was led by the state attorney general personally, a rare occurrence that underscored the severity and sensational nature of the case. The evidence against Blackwood was overwhelming. His own confession, the bodies in the cave, the journal detailing generations of murder, the testimony of Jessica Hartley about Sarah's investigation, and most damning of all, Sarah's own journal entry written hours before her death. But the prosecution also brought in an unexpected witness, a handwriting expert who'd analyzed the historical documents found in the caves. This expert testified that the original journal from 1889, the one written by Harold Blackwood describing the murder of the 3 Seneca men, showed signs of having been modified and added to over the years. Some entries, particularly those describing the mandate to kill anyone who discovered the truth, appeared to have been written much later, possibly in the 1950s. "What does this mean?" the prosecutor asked. "It means," the expert explained, "that the so-called mandate that each generation claimed to be following may have been a fabrication created by a later generation to justify their own murders. Harold Blackwood may have killed 3 men in 1889, but the elaborate system of silencing witnesses every generation, that appears to have been invented decades later as a rationalization. This revelation added another layer of tragedy to the case. The Blackwood family had killed for over a century to uphold a tradition that may have been manufactured by one of their own ancestors to excuse murder. The original crime had been compounded by generations of paranoia, pride, and cowardice. The defense attempted to argue diminished capacity, claiming Robert Blackwood had been psychologically damaged by being raised in a family that normalized murder as a form of protection. They brought in psychologists who testified about the effects of generational trauma and indoctrination. But Ellen Chen's victim impact statement destroyed any sympathy the jury might have felt. She stood in the courtroom, Sarah's research binder in her hands, and spoke directly to Robert Blackwood. "My daughter died because she was curious, because she loved history and wanted to understand the town she'd made her home. She died because your family valued its reputation more than human life. You say you were indoctrinated, that you inherited this burden, but you made a choice. You chose to kill Sarah. You chose to kill Michael Torres. You chose to kill your own brother. Those weren't mandates from the past. Those were your decisions made by you in the present." Ellen opened the research binder. Sarah documented everything, every disappearance, every victim, every lie your family told to cover up the previous generation's crimes. She knew this work was dangerous. She wrote in her notes that she might become the next victim. But she kept investigating because she believed that truth mattered, that justice mattered, that the people your family killed deserved to be remembered, not erased from history. She held up photographs of all 11 victims. Margaret Whitmore was 28 years old. She wanted to write a book celebrating Millbrook Falls' history. James Hartley was 45. He was organizing photographs for the town's anniversary. Rebecca Lawson was 35, helping to preserve historical documents. Thomas Grant was 42, teaching students about their town's past. The 3 Seneca men whose names we'll never know, they came seeking justice for a broken agreement and were murdered for it. Ellen's voice broke slightly. Michael Torres was 31. He was investigating environmental damage, trying to protect communities from industrial pollution. And Sarah, my Sarah, was 32. She wanted to uncover forgotten stories, to give voice to people history had overlooked. She looked directly at Blackwood. Every single person your family killed was trying to do something good. They were trying to preserve history, educate people, protect communities, seek justice, and your family killed them for it. Not because they were dangerous, because the truth was dangerous to your family's reputation. The courtroom was silent as Ellen continued. You say you're tired of carrying this burden, but my burden is heavier. I have to live the rest of my life without my daughter. I have to wake up every morning knowing she died alone in a cave, murdered by someone she trusted, someone who represented the institution of learning and preservation that she valued so much. She closed the binder. Sarah's last words, written in her journal as she lay dying, were about truth, about how the truth was worth dying for, because now your family could never hide what they'd done. She was right. The truth is out. Your family's legacy is destroyed, and every victim you tried to erase has been remembered. That's Sarah's victory. That's her legacy. What's yours? The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 3 counts of first-degree murder. Sarah Chen, Michael Torres, Richard Blackwood. Conspiracy to conceal homicide, desecration of human remains, and obstruction of justice. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Robert Blackwood was given the opportunity to make a statement before the judge announced his sentence. He stood, hands cuffed, and spoke in a steady voice. I want the court to know that I am the last Blackwood. I never married. I have no children. When I die, the family name dies with me. Perhaps that's the real justice here. Not my imprisonment, but the erasure of a family that should never have been allowed to continue. He paused, then continued. I've spent the last 6 months thinking about what Ellen Chen said, about choice. She's right. I did make choices. Every time I considered going to the authorities, I chose not to. Every time I thought about breaking the pattern, I chose to maintain it instead. And when Sarah Chen and Michael Torres got too close to the truth, I chose to kill them rather than face the consequences of what my family had done. I was raised to believe that family loyalty was the highest virtue, that protecting the family name was worth any sacrifice. But Mrs. Chen is right about something else too. Every person my family killed was trying to do good in the world, and we killed them to protect a reputation built on lies and murder. He looked at the judge. I don't ask for mercy. I don't deserve it. I only ask that the court remember the victims, that their names and their stories are preserved, that what they tried to accomplish, uncovering truth, preserving history, seeking justice, is honored. Let them be remembered not as victims of the Blackwoods, but as brave people who stood up to power and corruption, even when it cost them everything. The judge, to 3 weeks of testimony with a stern expression, finally spoke. Mr. Blackwood, I've been a judge for 23 years. I've presided over hundreds of murder trials, but I've never encountered anything quite like this case. A century of murder, passed down through generations like a family business, 11 lives taken, 11 families destroyed, all to protect a secret that, as we've learned, may not even have been what you thought it was. She looked at the evidence presented on the table before her, the journals, the photographs, Sarah's research. Sarah Chen was 32 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She could have walked away when she realized how dangerous her research had become. But she didn't. She kept investigating because she believed in truth and justice. And in the end, she became the evidence that brought your family's crimes to light. The judge's voice hardened. You say you want the victims to be remembered. The court will ensure that happens. But you will be remembered as the man who killed a librarian for doing her job, who murdered a journalist for investigating pollution, who killed his own brother to keep a secret that was already about to be exposed. That is your legacy, Mr. Blackwood. Not your family name, not your heritage, not your burden, just murder and cowardice. She announced the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole for each murder count, to be served consecutively. 3 life sentences, Robert Blackwood would die in prison. As guards led him away, he looked back at Ellen Chen one last time. She met his gaze without flinching. And then he was gone, removed from the courtroom, from society, from the town his family had founded 130 years ago. 8 months after Robert Blackwood's sentencing, Millbrook Falls held a dedication ceremony for a memorial in Riverside Park. The town had changed significantly in the months since the trial. The scandal had brought national attention, and with it, a reckoning with the town's power structures. The Historical Society had been completely reorganized. Sarah Chen had died 3 years and a day ago. But her voice, her curiosity, her courage, her commitment to truth still echoed through Millbrook Falls and beyond. The last witness had broken a century of silence, and in doing so, she'd inspired countless others to speak their own truths, to challenge their own powerful families, to preserve their own difficult histories. The memorial stones would stand for generations. But more than that, the example they represented of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, of curiosity triumphing over corruption, of truth prevailing over power, would endure forever. Sarah Chen's story had ended in a cave beneath Millbrook Falls, but her legacy, written not in stone, but in the hearts and actions of everyone she'd inspired, was just beginning. The last witness had spoken, and the world, finally, was listening.